So you know Orpheus, right? Orpheus, who was the Robert Johnson of the Greek world, the Eddie Van Halen, the Mozart, the Jay-Z of the Greek world. Orpheus, who was the most amazing musician, singer, and poet that anyone had ever seen. And Orpheus's gift of song was so great that the rocks and the trees would move to hear his songs. When he was finished singing, sometimes there would be a grove around him of rocks and trees. Oaks, maples, willows. They had all moved from their places in the ground to be closer to Orpheus and the song that he sang. I'm Jay Leeming, and this is the Crane Bag Podcast. Today we're going to enter the Greek world, the ancient Greek world, through a few stories. That world which is alive and well around us. Do we live in a world of trees and stones and people and streets and cats and dogs? Yes, we do, as did the ancient Greeks. And here where I live in upstate New York, the Greek and Roman names are all around me as well. I live in Ithaca. Not too far from me there is Rome, there is Syracuse, Utica. Homer is a town around here, as is Ovid, or Ovid, depending on if you're talking about the town or the poet. The town is Ovid, the poet is Ovid. Kind of confusing. These names were all decided upon by European Americans, I should say, who came here and were setting up New York State and had been raised on the stories of Greece and Rome, and so put those names here in the land. Which, on one level, is a strange act of cultural conquest, to claim these lands, these hills, and streams and rivers in the name of these places far away. So on one level, that's an act of conquest. I would say it's also mainly just an act of blindness, because the people, Simeon DeWitt, other folks like that, who named these places up here, simply did not know, were not aware of, could not conceive of the stories that were here in the land. Stories told by the Gaiokono, the Cayuga native tribes, Gaiokono, I should say. And so on one level, that's simply blindness. On another level, it's a very simple and human desire to put stories into the land where you live, to have the land remember them, for the earth is the memory of the world, of all things which happen. They are recorded in the earth, and the earth remembers them. So today we are going to voyage into that memory, into those stories, which are alive here around us. Orpheus was a great musician, a great singer, and he had a woman that he loved named Eurydice, and she died. She was bitten by a snake, and she died. I'm just giving you the basic story here, because this is not the main event. The main event is coming to you. I'm just giving you the background, which is that the love of his life died and was taken to the underworld, and Orpheus went down there with the power of song in his hands and in his voice, and walked through that darkness. And all the torments of all the citizens of the underworld, the dead souls, were alleviated by his song which was like a whisper of doves and a beautiful music. And he found Hades there at the bottom of the underworld, there in a chair of ice. And Hades agreed. He said, "You can take her back, yes, indeed, as long as you do not look back yourself, as long as you do not turn around. Then all shall be well, and you and the woman of your heart will return to the upper world." Well, Orpheus walked back, but of course he could not do this. And he tried to be strong. He tried to have faith. This man whose music gave him power over all things had trouble trusting in another, had trouble believing that she was actually there. And so, as he came up towards the upper world, as he saw the green glow of the fields of the upper world there in the darkness, he turned, and he saw Eurydice, who was there, in a white dress, and she just dropped away like a shell dropped into dark water. And Orpheus, sorrowing, returned to the upper world. And he lived for many years, and his songs were still amazing, magnificent, fantastic, oceanic songs, like nothing anyone had heard before. And he sang for the people, but his songs were often sad and sorrowful, filled with shadows and with rust and with all the dark and troubling things he had seen in the underworld. Often he would sing sitting on a stone in a river. Often he would sing in a field, and the trees and the rocks would come, and the people from the nearby villages would come and listen. And sometimes he would simply sit at the edge of a field and sing for himself. And one day he did that, and the song he sang was a song not of air, but of stone. It was not a wild bird in the air, but it was something wrought, something carved and made in that moment, out of his voice and that moment. And it was a song, and it was a story. And it was about a man who was a sculptor, and who could look at boulders and see deep within them, see what was hiding inside the boulder. He could look at a boulder and say, that's a winged horse. And he would take his hammer and his chisel, and he would chop and work away, chip away at that boulder until the winged horse was freed from the stone. People liked this. Rich people paid a lot of money for this sculptor to make things for them. Sometimes he would look at a small boulder and see a bird inside. And then with his hammer and his chisel, he would work away at that stone until the bird was freed. And it almost seemed like he could fly, because his art was so wonderful and magnificent. Well, this fellow was not super lucky in love, shall we say. He did not have a woman of his heart. He began many relationships with ladies, but they never quite went as far as he might wish them to, because he always turned away. He saw far away. He had dreams in his head about the woman of his heart, and none of the people he met were like that. This is a story about love and about boulders and about stone. It's a song sung by Orpheus at the edge of a field where two things meet, the forest and the field. And he sang about a sculptor. Hello, welcome to the Zoom call. Yes, and he sang about a sculptor, Orpheus did, who would make marvelous things come out of stones. And this fellow had a vision in his head of the perfect lady for him. And so one day he took a stone and he moved it from his workshop and into his house there. And he began chipping away at this stone to make the woman of his dreams. Can we use that phrase? Yes, we all have dreams. Men and women have dreams. All of us. Raccoons have dreams. Stones have dreams. Perhaps even trees have dreams. So this fellow began making the perfect lady for himself out of this stone. And he chipped this way and that way, and now he could make it exactly as he wanted to. Did I say it? Well, it was a statue. It was not alive. It was a thing come from this stone. Perhaps stones are alive, of course, but that's a question for another story. In this story, it wasn't it was a stone, and he crafted a lady out of the stone, her shoulder just the way he wanted it to be, just as he envisioned it in his head, her nose this way, her waist this way, her arm outstretched like this. She seemed almost real, and she was there on a pedestal, and it was there in his house. And for a while it was spooky. It was funny when it crossed that line, Can you imagine? It was just a stone. It was still a stone with a shoulder, a stone with a knee, a stone with an elbow, with a nose, with a face. There came a moment when this stone looked like a person. And he would walk into his house and he would startle. Whoa, what is that? Who is that? Oh, that's the statue I'm making. The statue I'm making of the perfect woman for me. So he would sometimes think there was someone in his house, and then he got used to it, and she was there every day. There she was, with her hand outstretched like this, almost like someone dancing, this statue standing on a pedestal. Sometimes at night the moon would shine in, and he would see her there, and he would be scared for a moment. Is there someone in my house? Oh, it's the statue. It is that thing I have made out of the stone. And he had a dream one night, in his room, washed by the moonlight. He had a dream that there was someone in the corner of his house looking in a mirror and brushing her hair. And he went over to her, and it was, in fact, the statue, because he turned and looked at where the statue was, and there was just the pedestal without a statue on it. And then he awoke from the dream. So he dreamed of her brushing her hair, looking into a mirror in his house. Now in this town where this sculptor lived, there was one day a festival, a flourishing festival to Aphrodite, the goddess of love. And everyone went to this festival, and songs were sung, and dances were danced, and delicious food was eaten, and people sang and offered up these songs to Aphrodite, the queen of love and romance, who came from the sea, born out of the ocean. And all beauty was at her fingertips, and in her fingertips, and in her eyelashes, and in her very heart. So people prayed to Aphrodite, and there was an altar there. And one by one you would go to the altar, and you would ask Aphrodite for what your deepest desire was, to ask to have that desire realized in this world. And this sculptor, he got in line with the others at night after the sun had gone down, when the songs were echoing off the trees and through the streets of this city. He went to that altar, and he made an offering to Aphrodite, the queen of love and beauty and romance. And he spoke true words from his heart. What they are, what they were, we do not exactly know. But the fire on the altar flared up 3 times. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. He saw this. And then he went out with his friends, and there was dancing and there was singing. But after a while he left all of them there, and he returned to his house. There in the moonlight he prepared to go to sleep, but on the way to his house he found a garland of flowers, and he picked it up. It had been crushed a little bit by people trampling on it, people dancing. But he went to his house with this garland of flowers, and there was the statue he had been working on, a statue that seemed finished, in fact. He'd gotten used to her there. Did I say her? He'd gotten used to it there, this statue he made, this thing he made out of a stone. And he went to it in the moonlight, and he put the garland of flowers around the neck of the statue. And he looked at her, so beautiful, a beauty he had envisioned and seen in the stone and made real, although she was, of course, made of stone. And in a sudden whim he reached out and he kissed her on the cheek. And as he did so, that cheek blushed, like the statue was embarrassed. And then this pink rose-colored light moved from her cheek to her other cheek, and to her chin, and to her eyes, and to her arms, her shoulders, her waist, down to her knees and her toes. And her eyes fluttered open, and she looked at him. And he said, "Who are you?" And she said, "Someone who loves you." And she kissed him, and he kissed her back, and they enjoyed the sweetness of being together in that moment there. And in the morning, he took the pedestal on which she had stood, and he put that pedestal back into his workshop, and he put a stone upon it, for he had other stones to carve. And in the next room, the woman he had made out of stone was no longer made of stone. She was in the corner of that house, looking into a mirror and brushing her hair. So Orpheus sang this song about the sculptor who made a statue which came to life. He sang this song at the edge of the forest there, but the forest heard it, and the grasses heard it, and they loved this song. And far off, the music drifted on the wind, and some other folks heard it. In fact, some women heard it who were wearing snakes. Yes, they were wearing snakes. They were followers of Dionysus, the god of honey and of wine, and of the grape and the vine, the god of infinite life. Wild, sprouting infinite life that comes slowly, the way kudzu can grow over an old car in a swamp, the way flowers grow, the way thorn bushes grow at the gates to castles, the slow, steady life, which is also the quick, laughing life of frolicking and dancing and singing in the moonlight and in the sun. So these ladies were followers of Dionysus, and I heard that they heard that song of Orpheus, and they did not like that song. No, they did not. That's what I'm here to tell you. They did not like that song, and they began stomping out a rhythm. And they said, "We do not like that song. We do not like that song. We want Orpheus to shut up. We want him to shut up. He's been groaning and moaning and groaning and moaning his songs for so long. We're tired of him. We are tired of him, are we not? Yes, we're tired of him," they said. "That guy moping around here. So he lost Eurydice. That was years ago. Come on, fellow, get over it. Get over it. Live a little. Stop moaning your sad, cobwebby songs. Let's get rid of him." So they grabbed stones and they ran across the field and they hurled those stones at Orpheus. And the stones went through the air and they fell at his feet. The stones refused to hit Orpheus. They fell at his feet as if asking his pardon for what they had been asked to do. So the women sneered and snarled, and the snakes on their shoulders, they sneered and snarled as well. And they ran off to a barn that was not that far off, and they ripped the door off its hinges, for they were very strong. They had the power of their own rage and their own anger and their own joy, which was inside the anger, I must say. And they ripped the door off its hinges, and they went inside that barn, and there were shovels there, and rakes, and there were hoes as well. They took hold of these, they seized them, and ran across the field. And they attacked Orpheus this way and that, and they beat him over the head and on the sides with these tools. And they killed Orpheus there at the edge of the forest and the field. They killed him, and they scattered him limb from limb, in fact, and threw those pieces of Orpheus into the river. And his head continued to whisper and to sing a wild whispering song as it floated down the river. It floated this way and that, around some rocks, down and down it floated, always singing, always talking, always gasping out a beautiful song and a story. Finally it came to the ocean. Finally this head of Orpheus was carried on the waves to an island which later became famous for its musicians and its poets. For this head washed up on the shore, someone found it. They built a temple around this head, a circular temple. So his head was there in the floor of the temple, and it would whisper the secrets of the underworld. For if you remember, Orpheus had been down below. He had seen all those things, which normally you only see if you're a ghost. But he had seen these things and remembered them and come back to the upper world. So his head was in this temple on this island, and all day and all night it whispered out the secrets of the underworld, and what Cerberus looks like, and what Charon is like in that boat, and what Sisyphus is doing there, and Tantalus, and what Hades looks like. He murmured these things. Sometimes sailors would come to that island, and they would hear this whispering sound, and they would go, and they would bend down and listen to Orpheus saying what happened in the underworld. This went on for some time, until finally, years later, Zeus heard tell of this, and he sent a lightning bolt down, bang, and it shattered that head, I must say, and it shut him up, so he no longer said the secrets of the underworld. But many other things happened in connection with this event. The soul of Orpheus, it went down to the underworld. It went down like rainwater goes down through dirt, down and down through the dirt and the clay and the minerals of this earth, through the stones, down to the underworld itself. And there he joined the throng of the dead, for he was truly dead this time. He was not as before when he'd come and he was breathing and alive. He was there, and his Persephone was there as well. His Eurydice was there as well. And they took hands. Did they take hands? Well, at first, no. At first, they hardly knew each other. For they had crossed the river Styx, which takes away all your memory. They were just people in a crowd, and they might have jostled against each other, might have seen each other's eyes, but they were just there in the thicket of ghosts in the underworld. But then Persephone heard of this. She saw them there, and she was merciful. And she took away their forgetting. She gave their memory back to them, so that Orpheus could look at Eurydice and hold her hand, and she could look at him and hold his hand, and they could look in each other's eyes. And they wandered that way through the underworld. And Orpheus then could look back, and he could see her there, and he would never lose her ever again. And Zeus took the lyre and placed it in the sky as a beautiful constellation up there, which we know as Lyra, the lyre. He put it there to remind humans and gods about the power of music and of beauty. So it was. And the women, these crazy, snarling women with the snakes on their shoulders, well, they were followers of Dionysus. Dionysus, the god of wine and of honey, who was not that far away. And he was a god, of course. And he listened, and he could hear the silence now that Orpheus had stopped singing. It had always comforted him, this sound, this beautiful sound that Orpheus made. So he heard that silence, and he knew instantly what had happened. He knew how it had happened, for he was a god. And he did not like this. He did not like what his followers had done. So he took a grape in his hand, and he began to squeeze this grape. As he did so, the women who had killed Orpheus continued to dance, stomping out their songs like this in that field, in the same place as if they would never stop. And they stomped, and as Dionysus squeezed the grape, their feet became heavier, like they wanted to stay on the ground. It got harder and harder for them to lift their feet. and their knees turned brown. Yes, they looked at each other, and their faces turned brown as well, and their hair began to stand on end, as if their hair wanted to touch the stars themselves. And they whirled this way and that way, and a wind came up, a roaring wind, and soon they found that they could not lift their feet from the ground. And they saw bark growing on their knees, and on their waists, and on their bellies. One would look at the other and see it happening to the other, only to realize that it was happening to her as well. And the bark crawled up the sides of their faces, and they sang and they cried until they could cry no more, and their hair became branches, and their hands went up in the sky like this and became branches as well. And the wind continued to roar around them, but now it was a wind blowing through a grove of trees. For they had been turned into trees, and a bird came and sat in those branches and began to sing. And Dionysus finished squeezing that grape, and the juice ran down his wrist. Well, for the rest of that day, his other followers, who had not killed Orpheus, they danced and they sang, in a merry procession across the world. Dionysus, you should know, he rides on the back of a leopard, a furry, gigantic cat. Yes, indeed. He sits on the back of it often, and he drinks wine, and he calls for more songs, and he tells jokes, and he tells stories. So this merry parade went through that field. And there were also goat men in this parade. Yes, they were men from the waist up. They were goats from the waist down. And they had pipes, and they would play these pipes, the most wild and unearthly music, hooting and blowing and whistling, like tubas that have drunk too much wine, like saxophones that got put together wrong, like crooked lightning this music was. So, hooting and blowing and whistling and laughing, this parade of goat men and women wearing snakes, and Dionysus on the big cat, the leopard, went meandering through the field and through the forest. And there was not far off, there was a palace, and there was a rose garden in that palace outside, and they all saw this rose garden and thought it was very beautiful. Yes, indeed. And the sun went down, and they all slept there in that field. The goat men slept. Dionysus slept, his leopard slept. The women with snakes over their shoulders, they slept as well. And in the morning, they were not there. It was as if they had never been there. Oh, perhaps if you walked through that field, you might see a place that looked like a deer had slept, where the grass was lain down there, crushed down by the body of someone, perhaps a deer, perhaps a goat man, perhaps a wild woman wearing a snake, perhaps the leopard or Dionysus himself. Now, as the sun rose on this day, other people awoke too in the world, and in that castle the gardener awoke. Yes, gardeners get up early, especially when it's hot out as it is here. He wanted to get his work done early in the day, in the cool of the morning, when the dew was still on the grasses. So this gardener got up, and he stretched, and he went to the palace rose garden. For the king of this palace loved roses. Roses are sacred to Aphrodite, of course, and he went to that rose garden. It was a lovely place. And the gardener had work on his mind. He saw the dew sparkling there. He said, well, I've got to weed this, I've got to weed that, I've got to work on that over there. And he set to work. The world was young. It is young early in the day, and then it gets old. Middle age hits about lunchtime, and then it gets old, and it sings the wild autumnal songs of the evening. And then the world dies, of course, and sleeps and is reborn the next day. So the world was new, it was morning, and the gardener looked, and he began pulling weeds out from beneath a rose bush. Weed here, weed here, weed here, goat foot, weed here, goat foot. What? He looked, weed here, goat foot. There were 2 goat feet beneath a rose bush. And he listened, he heard a snoring sound. And he looked, and there was a goat man asleep under the rose bush. A big goat man with a long white beard. His flute was there in the grass. He had been following Dionysus. Somehow he'd gotten lost. Here he was sleeping beneath the rose bush. Oh boy, thought the gardener, these guys are trouble. I don't like these guys. I better go tell the king. So he went to the king. King was awake at this point. King was working in the throne room. There was a page there telling him the news of the day. Unemployment rate is 2%, pretty good. Insurance is at this. Interest rates, your appointment with the ambassador of blah, blah, blah is here later. And then there'll be a proclamation at noon. And, excuse me, King, there's a goat man. There's a goat man in the garden. Oh, a goat man, said the king. I love those guys. Yeah, let's be kind to him. And he told some servants to go get the goat man and take him into the castle and put him in a nice soft bed, and to put a table beside the bed with some bread and cheese and a vase of water on it there. So these servants took the goat man very carefully, and he slept the whole time, the goat man did, and they put him in the bed. And he slept for much of the day. And the king went about his business. Insurance rates are here. Should we charge it? I don't know. The money, we got this much money here. There's a war over there. Do we send our ambassador here? All the kingly stuff that kings need to think about, which isn't all gold and scepters and crowns. Let me tell you, it's not all dragons and fire. It's also tedious work, counting the peas in the barn, counting the grain, taxes and stuff like that. So he worked with all that. And then in the afternoon, a sound came. And the sound was, and the king said, the goat man, he is awake. Let's go visit the goat man. Should we visit the goat man in this story? We could stop. We could stop right here and do something more reasonable, but I think we should visit the goat man. So the king decided to visit the goat man in his palace, who'd been asleep in the rose garden. So he went over there, went to his room, and the goat man was there, and he was singing some loud, outrageous songs. And he was in the bed there where the servants had put him, and he was drinking bread and eating wine. Wait a minute, is that right? He was drinking wine and eating bread and drinking water as well. And the king came in and said, "Good day, goat man, how are you?" And the goat man said, "I'm pretty good. Are you awake?" And the king said, I think I'm awake. "Oh, I'm sorry, said the goat man. "I'm sorry you're awake. Sleep is better, and death is the best. Death is the best thing." "Oh, okay," said the king. "I don't know. How are you?" "I'm pretty good," said the goat man. "It seems," said the king, "that you were following Dionysus there in your parade, and you got a little separated from your fellows." Might have been separated. You know this guy Nasrudin, so he was walking through a city. Nasrudin was. "Who's Nasrudin?" said the king. It doesn't matter. He's this guy. He's walking through the city, and he sees some horses coming, and there's people on it. So Nasrudin thinks, oh, these might be thieves. Robbers. I got to get out of here. So Nasrudin jumps over the fence into the cemetery of this town, and he hides there down by the fence there. "Do you get this, king? Do you get this?" "I get it," he said. So the goat man went on. And so these thieves came down the road on their horses, but in fact they weren't thieves at all. They were friends of Nasrudin. They knew him by his looks, and they were no trouble to him at all. So they went to the fence there near the cemetery, and they looked down around the fence, and there was a Nasrudin pretending to be asleep in the cemetery. And they said, "Nasrudin, what are you doing down there? What brings you there?" And Nasrudin said, "I am here because of you, and you are here because of me." So the goat man told these stories to the king, wild, outrageous stories, and he sang, "Take up the flowers, throw them all around. Let's pour some wine, the best that can be found. Let's smash the bowl of the great, let's smash the bowl, king. Let's smash it. Smash the bowl of the great heavens and start creation all over again. Whoop-ah! A whole day, king." The king was like, "What are you talking about?" But after all the taxes and facts and figures the king had to deal with all day, this goat man just telling crazy stories was kind of a lot of fun, actually. And the goat man did it over and over again. "A whole day," said the goat man. "What do you mean?" said the king. "He fell for a whole day. Hephaestus, after he was born, his mother, Hera up there, she looked at him and she said, he's too small. I'm going to throw him back, just like a fish in the sea. Whoop! And she threw him away from Olympus, and he went falling down to earth, and it took him, a whole day to fall. A whole day. And they say," said the goat man, "as he fell, geese circled around him, and they whispered to him the secrets of the universe, and how the universe began with a great duck that lay upon an egg of silence and darkness, and then this egg hatched, and the world began." Bah! So the goat man carried on, and he was well cared for in this palace, and the king was very kind to him. The goat man, whose name was Silenus, and actually had taught Dionysus many things over his long life, he stayed in that castle for about 5 days. And then, after the 5th day, someone came knocking at the gate of the castle. And it was a woman, again, wearing a snake. And she had a stick with a pine cone, a gold pine cone on the end. And she had a little spot of honey right there, like a bindi up there. And she said to the guards, "I'm looking for Silenus, the goat man. Have you seen him around?" "Oh, we have. Yeah, he's been carrying on in this place for days. It's been hard for us to sleep, honestly. But come get him. Yeah, the king loves him. We're kind of tired of him." But so they went, and she found him there. And she took Silenus by the hand. "Ah, goat man, I'm so glad I found you," she said. "Dionysus has been worried. "Ah, yes. Well, the king said, I've been caring for him. Everything's fine. He's all right. He just fell asleep in the rose bushes there. It's okay." "Thank you," the woman said. "Thank you. The king of honey and of the grape, the king of infinite life, he will remember this kindness you have done to his dear old teacher, Silenus, the goat man." "Ba, ba, ba, ba," the goat man said, and he put his arms around her, and he sang, and he kissed her toes, and he started playing a song, and he told 3 more jokes about plumbers who are too far asleep to fix anything, and then he went home and with her and went out the gate and back to Dionysus and his followers. And the king went back to facts and figures, all the things a king has to think about: numbers, insurance, unemployment rates, proclamations, all this. But a few days later, when the king was in his rose garden, suddenly there stepped out of the air, it seemed, there stepped a leopard, and on the back of this leopard was a man. And this man had a beard, he had some grapes, he was drinking some wonderful potion. He was right there. And this man was, of course, Dionysus, the lord of the vine, the lord of infinite life. And Dionysus said, "Oh, my king, thank you for treating my old teacher, the goat man, so well. I wish to give you a gift." "Oh, really?" said the king. "A gift?" Yes, said Dionysus. "You can wish for anything you would like. Anything." The king said, "Gold." "What?" "Gold. I want gold. I want everything I touch with my hands to become gold." "Oh," said Dionysus. "Are you sure that's what you want? This is a big thing to ask." "I'm sure," said the king. "I'm sure." It was like he was whispering a secret to him. "I'm sure." Dionysus closed his eyes for a moment, and then he opened them, and he said, "Tomorrow, when the sun rises, this gift shall be given to you. Everything you touch with your hands will become gold. May you get what you desire." And the leopard rowled one time. They rowl. That's a technical storytelling word for what a leopard does in this situation. He rowled and caterwauled and meowed in the most aggressive way, and he turned around and they disappeared into a fold between one instant and the other. And Dionysus and the leopard were gone. And there was a sound of flutes in the air, and then there was not. Well, this king was very excited. He had a hard time keeping still. He began looking around at everything in his palace. Suddenly everything, it seemed like there was gold waiting inside them, like a secret thing, like a spell inside them already. Tomorrow, if I touch it, it will be gold. That's what he told himself. If I touch that book there, if I touch that sword on the wall, if I touch the floor, it'll all be gold. Everything, he looked at everything with hungry eyes. Yes, this is good. And he started preparing. He went to the garden. Now there was a stone table in this garden, a round stone table. He put a wooden bowl on one side of this table. And then he took a sword, his favorite sword. He put that there. He wanted everything all set for tomorrow, the big day. The big day, you know what that's like. The big day is coming. Your Christmas, your birthday, your Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, everything, Arbor Day. It is the big day. Yes, indeed. It is finally going to happen, whatever it is. And it keeps changing and flickering like a butterfly. Lost and our desire goes on. So that desire was inside this king, whose name was Midas. It was in his head, and he said, "Oh, everything's going to be gold. This will be lovely. This will be great." He started putting things there on the stone table in the rose garden: a spear, a sword, a wooden bowl, a statue he'd gotten from deepest Africa, brought to him by an ambassador. This will be lovely. And then later, of course, the sun went down. You can count on that often in stories. The sun went down, and the king tried to sleep. But sleep was hard. No, he slept this way, that way, a little bit, but it was hard. There was so much to look forward to. Yes, indeed, tomorrow's the day, the gold day. Yes, tomorrow is it. Well, he woke up before dawn. Yes, the birds were just singing their first cries, the early birds. And the sky was turning blue, as it does, before the sun arises, before the sun is born out of darkness, which is the mother of all things. So he got up, and he crept through the palace. All the servants were asleep. He went down to the rose garden. It was beautiful. There was dew on the grasses there. There was dew on the roses. And he listened to the birds singing. And he waited, pacing back and forth in circles, wondering what he would turn to gold first. What would it be? And then, finally, it happened, and the sun was born out of the darkness, which is mother of all things, and the light came, and the long light came through the garden, and shone on all things. The golden light of the sun filled the world. And at the same time, he looked at his hands. They did not look any different. They were just his plain old hand, just like your hands, perhaps. He looked at these hands. They did not look different. And he walked to the table, the stone table. He put his hands on that wooden bowl. He held it tight. As he did so, gold seemed to flow and move like smoke through the substance of that bowl, and that bowl became gold entirely. And the morning sun shone on that bowl. It was now a golden bowl. This is wonderful. He gasped. He grabbed hold of the sword. Yes, the sword. He held it up. He held it up like this. And again, gold seemed to leak from his hands and fill that entire sword, the way smoke fills a room, perhaps. And that gold became shining and bright. Yes. Oh, this is wonderful. He grabbed a spear with both hands. Oh, love it. And the gold slowly trickled, and it became a golden spear. He was crazy now. He grabbed hold of the table itself. He took hold of the table, and yes, in seconds, that entire table became gold. He held his hands out. He staggered through the garden. An oak tree. An oak tree. He grabbed hold of the oak tree. As he did so, it took a few seconds, but the gold flowed this way, and that acorns turned gold. The leaves turned gold. The branches, every one of them, like music changing key. It had been in one key, now it was in another. So this oak tree, which had been wood, of course, a growing thing, became metal, became this shining, brilliant metal, which will never die and will endure and will not tarnish. He wandered around. His hands were magic. They were powerful. He went to the wall of his palace. He put his hands against that wall. The gold flowed. The entire wall of the palace became a shining sheet of gold. The morning light reflected off it and bounced out, sparkling into the world. Fantastic! Yes, he said. He went inside the kitchen. Now, there were a few servants up like this. They were working on a few things for the day's food. They looked at him. He looked strange. He looked very weird, walking like this with his hands out. He came. He saw some eggs. Suddenly, I'll turn the eggs gold. He grabbed the eggs just like that. He had golden eggs in his hands. He showed them to the servants. One of them dropped a spoon on the floor. In shock, she backed away. He went like this. She backed away some more. He looked. There was some asparagus. Yes, boom, grabbed the asparagus. Golden asparagus. Some broccoli. It's golden too. A spoon, a fork, a knife. Wonderful. He went staggering away from the kitchen into the banquet hall. He grabbed hold of the table, and it was all gold, a golden banquet table. The servants stood in surprise. They backed away from him. They looked at him. What had possessed their king? What wild hunger was running crazily inside him up his bones? What was happening? He was dangerous, it seemed. Was he drunk? Was he dreaming? What was going on? He was turning things to gold left and right. And then he grabbed some bread. He took hold of that bread, and it was golden bread. And he stuffed it into his mouth, and it tasted horrible. It was metal. I can't eat metal. And he grabbed an apple. He took hold of the apple. He tried really fast to get into his mouth. Maybe if he could do it quickly enough. But the apple was metal as well. He spat out shards of metal gold. He grabbed some water. He tried to drink that water, but the cup was golden, the water was golden, and liquid gold dribbled down his beard and onto the floor. This is a problem, something said inside him. This is a problem. And he was hungry, and he reached slowly for a pear. With less excitement now, he reached out for a pear. He took hold of that pear, but it was useless. It was a golden pear. I will starve, he said. I will starve. And he dropped the pear on the floor, and it rolled around a little bit. It was metal. It made a clang as it hit the floor. The servants looked at him. They covered their faces. What is happening to this, our king? He went around some more. Everything could be gold. Nothing could be real. Nothing could be anything but gold that he touched. He realized, he began to think, is there a way? What can I wear gloves? No, the gloves would be gold. Is there a way out? Maybe, is there a magician I know? I don't know any magicians. Interest rates are at 35%. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? He started to stagger around. He went to the door of the castle. He began to walk out towards the city. He didn't know where to go. He couldn't get away from his hands. His hands, everything they touched would be gold. He walked out of the castle. The guards followed him. King, are you okay? Leave me, he said. Leave me, leave me. He began to stagger into town. The guards followed him for some time. Follow him, said the chief minister. Follow him. He's nuts. Follow the king. So they tried to work through the city and follow him. He went this way and that through the city's streets. The city was waking up. Dogs were barking. Chickens were moving around. People were going to market to sell bread and apples and onions and carrots, to sell roast chickens, the wonderful foods of this world, the foods that he could not eat. Take it away, he said. Take it away. Everybody looked. Who was he yelling at? With a king? Who was he yelling? Take it away. Take it away. I don't want it. I don't want it. Nobody knew what he was talking about. Nobody answered him. So he wandered through the city, lost, a wild man. He came to the edge of that city. He yelled again, take it away. I don't want it. No, take it away. But nobody answered. Nobody answered. He went into the forest. Again he yelled over again, take it away, take it away. He went this way and that, through some bushes this way. They turned gold when he touched them. He went past a tree. It turned gold as well as he touched that tree. He left a trail of golden plants as he went into this forest. He came to a stone. He slumped down against the stone. He touched it. Of course, it became a golden boulder. He knocked his head against it like this. Take it away, Dionysus. Take it away. Please take it away. And finally, out of the air, there came a flickering shape, and it was the leopard. And on the back of the leopard there was a man, and he had a wine glass in his hand, and there was a pot of honey there in his other arm right there. And he said, hello, sir, how goes it with you? Horrible, says the king, horrible, take it away, I was a fool. Did you get what you desired? Take it away, said the king, take it away. And Dionysus closed his eyes and then opened them again, and he said, if you go to the spring in the center of this forest, if you go to the source of the river that runs through your city, that is the spring, that is the source of that river, then you must bathe in that spring. 3 times you must plunge yourself completely under the water and come back out. If you do that, then this gift I have given you, this thing that you wanted so badly, then it will go from you, like a bird set free from your hands. It will go away. Thank you, said the king. Thank you. And Dionysus turned, and the leopard disappeared into the space between one moment and the other. And the king went wandering, but with purpose now, through the forest, past these bushes, past these trees, turning a leaf here, a branch here, gold, turning a bush gold here by accident. Finally he came. Finally he heard the whispering, trickling sound of those waters. He plunged his hands in first, just like that. But it was no good. He had to get entirely under the water. He took off all his clothes. He dove into that spring, the cool, clear water. He came out gasping into the air. He went down again under the water, entirely in the watery world. Came out gasping a second time, down a third time into the water, the cold waters swirling around him, the water where this river starts, the beginning of this watery journey to the sea. He stuck his head out again. He gasped. Was it gone? Was it gone? The water was not gold. He went to the shore. He put his hands on some stones, some gray, ordinary stones, and they changed into nothing at all. They were simply ordinary stones, wet with water. And in that moment, they seemed the most beautiful things he'd ever seen. Real stones, and they stayed stone. They were gray, purple, a little lichen on the side, the color of green. Oh, it was lovely. He breathed a huge sigh. He got out of that spring, he found his clothes, he put them on, and he walked back towards the village. And he saw a flickering light of some gold leaves here, or a gold tree there. But he stayed away from those places. He was sick of gold, he was. He walked back through the village. People saw him, and they looked at him strangely. But he was the king. You didn't want to stare at the king for too long. And the guards, well, they saw him. And they kept their distance as well, and the king walked slowly back, in a humble way, back to his palace. His palace, which now had a golden banquet table, which had one wall on the outside, it was all gold, which had a golden table in its garden, with a golden sword, a spear, and a golden bowl upon it, and of course a golden oak tree in that garden. Well, he went to that castle, he went to bed, and he slept for a long time. The next morning he awoke, he grabbed hold of things, his pillow, he got a table beside him, and these things all stayed as they were. Nothing changed to gold. And he breathed out a huge sigh. And that evening, well, he was in his palace, as a king often is. And he was having dinner. He was about to have dinner there. But before dinner happened, before the servants brought in the food, he went to the garden filled with roses, which are sacred to Aphrodite, the goddess of love and romance, that beautiful melody threaded through all things of this universe. He went to that garden, and he picked some simple oak leaves from another tree that was not gold, a simple green bunch of leaves from the oak tree. He grabbed hold of these in his hand, he crunched them in his hands, held them tight, and he went back to the banquet hall with the golden table, and he put these oak leaves in a dish in the center of the table. And he sat down at that table, and he called for food, and the servants brought that food. And one of them said to the king, "King, do you want some flowers? Do you want some flowers on this table? We've got some wonderful flowers in the garden. Some are pink, some are orange, some are yellow. They're the colors of gold and beautiful things. Do you want something like that? Why do you want these oak leaves here?" And the king looked at the servant and said, "I like these oak leaves. I like them because they're green." All right. Thank you for joining me here and listening to these stories. These stories that come to us out of the past, though they are right now, though they're happening, though they're as bright as the stars, they're as green as the broccoli in your lunch, as fresh as the bark of the dog. They come to us out of our collective dream life. The whole Orpheus story, wild, just great stuff. Orpheus, the musician, who has a power, right? He's got a power that his music summons trees and rocks. They, in fact, move. His music changes reality in a very deep way. Wild and beautiful thing. But Orpheus cannot trust, right? He goes down there to the underworld, comes back, and he cannot trust. He is not able to believe the word of Hades, the Lord of the Dead. And then, of course, Orpheus sings some stories to the people up there in the world above. And one of them is this story about Pygmalion, the sculptor who builds a woman. "Build me a woman," say the doors. And Pygmalion does exactly that. He sculpts the love of his life, and she comes to life. And then, after singing that story, Orpheus is torn apart by crazy, drunken women who are followers of Dionysus. I love it. It's perfect, I tell you. I mean, I like Orpheus and everything. Who doesn't? Who doesn't love the beautiful song? But he cannot trust. He doesn't walk that path of being in relationship with another. That path where you're in relationship with someone who is not you, who has their own desires and wishes and whims and failures and faults and beautiful parts as well. To be in relationship with a true other person, someone unpredictable with a will of their own. Orpheus does not quite experience that. And then, bitter about it perhaps, he sings a story about a sculptor who also does not have that, and just makes the perfect lady for himself, and she comes to life. So emotionally, I just feel on the side of the crazy ladies here who tear Orpheus apart. A complete loss of control, right? They don't poison him. They don't hang him from the neck. They rip him to pieces. A complete loss of control. This man who was powerful and controlled others in a way through his music. So it's just beautiful how these stories speak to us in these dream images, which seem so true to me, seem so right, and say something about who we are and how we relate to others. Of course they tear him apart, of course. And then we get the story of Midas, which perhaps is clear. I don't know. Are we like Midas? Are you like Midas, you listener to this show? Me, the speaker of this show, the carrier of this story, perhaps. Are you like Midas? Am I like Midas? I don't know. Midas, I mean, he wants everything to be gold. He wants everything to be gold. When I think about this story, to me, I mean, sometimes I have a tendency, I want all experiences to be rich and nourishing. I want everything that happens to me to pay off in some way. You know that those times you're talking with friends or whatever, and you talk about some rough part of your life, and then looking back on it, you can say, oh, well, I learned this from it, or I grew as a person from it. I aspire to that. But there are times in my life that they're just nothing, you know? You're in the Newark airport for 5 hours, and you get nothing out of it. That's just what it is. You have a furious cold, a head cold for a week, and that's just what you have. So anyway, that's my window into this story for me, is wanting all my experiences to pay off and be beautiful. I want them to be gold. Midas wants everything to be gold. So perhaps you, in listening to this story, can find a door or a window into it yourself. That's why these stories have lasted so long, is that they speak to men and to women about their lives and about the journey of their lives. And they are exaggerated in some ways, but it's not really exaggeration. It's more like a dream, right? The way a dream will take the moments and circumstances of your life and then speak them to you in a new way. They've been sung into a higher register, a different register, translated into images. So these stories are the same way. These patterns and rituals that we live out in our lives, these ceremonies, these problems and failures and victories we have, these old stories speak of them. They sing of them in this wild way of poetic dream images. And they have a lot to give to us if we can give to them. And in these crazy, interesting times in which we are living, these stories have a lot to give us. These particular stories I'm getting from Ovid, the Roman poet who lived, like I said, about 2,000 years ago. He was exiled to the Black Sea. He wrote some things which the emperor did not like, and he was banished from Rome, which is a little bit like living in Manhattan all your life and then being sent to Montana. Nothing wrong with Montana. I like Montana. But he was a man of the city. Ovid was. And for him, the Black Sea was a wasteland. It's like being on Mars. So that's how he ended out his days after being a big poetry star in some ways and a hero in many ways. He ended up on the Black Sea there, mourning the wild, fast, beautiful life he had in Rome, which was to him the whole world. And so perhaps now, the next time I drive through Ovid, I will remember Ovid. And you too out there, listener to this horse of meaning who is running and sleeping and rampaging through the fields and the forests of your listening. May you also be aware of the stories under your feet and around you in the grocery store, in the email messages you receive, in the news, in the faces of the people you see on the street. Thank you for listening to this podcast. There are more stories on my website, which is jleeming.com, JAYLEEMING.com. If you're able to throw coins into the golden pot, well, the rusty metal pot, if you're able to throw coins into the hat and support this podcast, please do so. These stories are free to folks on the website. I like doing that because I don't own these stories. They belong to all of us. We belong to them, perhaps I should say. But supporting me via Patreon helps to make that possible and make the details of the way in which we are owned by story clear to us in the most flourishing and happy way and festival-like way. Take care, and thanks for listening. All the best.